So last night I watched the latest Netflix film, The Electric State. Now, this was a film that I was anticipating. I was anticipating it with a little bit of trepidation because of some of the early things I had seen about it. I'll explain the reasons for my trepidation in a moment. I had seen trailers for it maybe a month or so ago, and I'm familiar with the story or the source material that this film is based on. But I want to start out by saying I think this film is going to get a lot of criticism and a lot of hate potentially from critics. I'm not saying that's undeserved, but I do want to give credit where credit is due. Watching the film, I did not think it was a horrible film. It wasn't like an absolute train wreck. I thought it was fun at times. I think the visuals were pretty decent. I thought it was a pretty movie. I thought the acting was competent. Millie Bobby Brown as Michelle, I think, did very well. Chris Pratt was Chris Pratt. Performances were fine. Visuals were fine. But I had one main problem with this story, and I think it's the problem that a lot of critics are going to have with this story. It's interesting to see on Rotten Tomatoes specifically that critics have given it a very low score, and the audience has given it a relatively okay score. I think it's at a 75 audience score on Rotten Tomatoes right now. And I have a couple theories as to why that is, and I'll go into that when I start discussing why I think it's getting a lot of criticism and why I, at the end of the day, do think that criticism is deserved and really was disappointed in the film ultimately. So this latest Netflix film called The Electric State is based on an illustrated novel of the same name by an artist named Simon Stålenhag. This is the illustrated novel. It has beautiful artwork. And I would say that the illustrated novel, as you could maybe figure out by the term illustrated novel, is mainly about the artwork. Simon Stålenhag is mainly a digital artist, and so he is more concerned with the story that is told via his art. The novel is very sparse on words, and it has paragraphs throughout that kind of lead you on a journey, but it's a journey that is left up to interpretation a lot of the time. It lays out the basic storyline of this girl, Michelle. This rough story, of course, is the basis of the Netflix film. I was surprised at how many things the Netflix film took from the book. The very, very rough storyline is pretty similar. The character design for some of the characters, or a lot of the characters, is actually pretty spot on. But because of just how sparse the illustrated novel itself is, the film obviously had to take creative license and flesh out that story a lot more than is fleshed out in the illustrated novel. And I'm going to talk a little bit right now about why I don't think it ultimately worked. So last night I took the time to read through this whole novel. I had flipped through it before. We've had the novel for several years at this point. It's a very easy read. It doesn't take you that long. It took me maybe an hour to read the whole thing. Like I said, it's a lot of picture and not as much words. That's actually the kind of book that I prefer. I'm a very slow reader. But remember when I said that I had some trepidations going into this film just based on the marketing material of the film. So seeing the film and then reading the novel, those trepidations were basically fleshed out in full form. So what I was nervous about when I saw the marketing material for this film is that they presented this as an action comedy. And just what I knew of Simon Stålenhag's art, I knew that comedy wasn't really how I saw what he was putting on paper. His art and his work always struck me as much more pensive, much more dark, much more thought-provoking than comedic. And that's what made me so trepidatious, so nervous about this movie, was the trailers made it seem upbeat and fun. You know, the description was an action comedy. And, to be honest, I saw Chris Pratt and I know what kind of characters he usually plays. And I was nervous for it. I was like, ooh, I really want this to be good because I know that the source material has some richness to it that could make this really good. But I just had my doubts. And unfortunately, as a lot of critics, I'm sure, are saying right now, those trepidations and that nervousness was justified because it kind of turned out exactly how I thought it was going to. They just made the film so unnecessarily light. They threw in just stupid slapstick and gags and jokes, and it seemed like they were making this movie for a much younger audience than I think it should have been made for. I think you could have very easily made this a rated R film, and had it been darker in tone, not afraid to be gritty, not afraid to go to that rated R realm, I think this could have been a lot better of a movie. I just don't know if there's a world where you can so dramatically switch tone like that from the source material to the film and have it work. Because I think what makes the source material so engaging is that it is not afraid to be gritty, it's not afraid to be raw, and it's not afraid to point out just the awful nature of the things that it's trying to tell you about, and the, I think, underlying commentary that it's supposed to have. Earlier, I said that some of the character design is very faithful to the novel, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, that also, I think, suffers a little bit in the film, because there's a lot of robots in the novel that are like painted with smiling faces and made to look happy, but they're in this awful dystopian ruin. And so that juxtaposition is very stark, and it makes you think, and it even makes it creepier and darker than it would normally be. So the character design that the movie borrowed, that actually was very faithful to the novel, because the movie was a lot lighter in tone, and those robots still have these smiles on their faces and these kind of silly character designs, that juxtaposition isn't there. And so it just makes it all feel a lot lighter than it should be. I know it might be kind of a cliche thing, especially for people like myself who like more art house movies. It might be kind of cliche to say, I wish they would have went darker and more gritty with this movie. But at the end of the day, your source material is darker and grittier and more thought-provoking and a little more depressing. To just lighten that up to the extent that they did, there's no world where I think that works very well. And you just kind of tick off your audience that is familiar with Simon Stålenhag's work. If I had to guess, I think the audience score that is relatively high, 75% on Rotten Tomatoes, I have to guess that that's probably people who are not familiar with the source material and who see this world. And admittedly, if you're not familiar with where the stuff is coming from, it's a cool world. The depictions of it in the movie are cool looking. The character designs are cool. The storyline is semi-interesting. The problem is all of the interesting things that the movie has to offer come basically directly from the book. And then I would say everything that really doesn't work about the movie is unique to the movie. It is where it deviates from the source material. And I know this is a criticism that is also levied against things like video game adaptations, like shows that are adapted from video games or even movies, where they will completely just go off script from the video game and make something completely different. And usually the criticism there is, look, you have a game that was beloved for a reason. Stick to that story because that's what people like. You trying to improve on this story that so many people love is just not going to land well. I think there can be times where you can deviate from a story, make it different, make it your own, and it turns out okay. But generally the wisdom is, if something works, don't try to fix it. Don't try to zhuzh it up in a way that's just kind of tonally deaf. It's a little bit ironic to say so because I don't know how well it was received necessarily, but several years ago now, Amazon made an Amazon original show based on another work by Simon Stålenhag called Tales from the Loop. They made a short series. I don't know how many episodes it was, but it was a show called Tales from the Loop. And that had the correct tone. It had a darker, more pensive, slow-moving, slightly more gritty tone. That show, I think, worked. It was such a vibe to watch. I think it had its problems, but I would much rather go back to watch that show because it was so much more faithful to the feeling of the artist's original concept than the movie Electric State is. I think they just completely tonally ruined this story, unfortunately. There's part of me that wants to say this is a fine film. I think it could cater to a younger audience, and I think they would like it. I think for people who aren't familiar with this source material, it's an interesting foray into that world. So there's part of me that wants to say it's a fine movie. But the other part of me that's familiar with where this story is coming from basically just wants to say,
look how they massacred my boy.
So unfortunately, I would probably give this film a 2.5 out of 5. Like I said, I don't think it was a train wreck, but I just really was disappointed that they did not take the tone of the source material seriously and that they tried to switch that up for some reason. I think it really, really damaged their effort at making a faithful adaptation. And it's just aggravating when adaptations are made like this, because the budget, the people involved, the source material all just point to this could have been something really, really great, like something that could have been Oscar worthy, but you just kind of muffed it. It's not that I wouldn't recommend this film. I think it's an interesting watch. I mean, it's on Netflix. It's easy to watch, so watch it if you want, but it ultimately is a little bit disappointing. On a closing note, what the heck is this? I don't know. Have a good one. Thanks for watching. Bye.